Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Mouth of Time podcast brought to you by the Shields Gazette. I'm Joe Buck. Joining me today is Nmecha Scurr and Miles Starforth to discuss everything Newcastle United and everything transfer related. Today, as we record, is Wednesday, 14th of June. The domestic transfer window has opened. Newcastle United have already been busy in the market. We'll touch on that later, but fresh off the press, news that broke at 1 o'clock today that Newcastle United have released their retain list ahead of the 2023-24 season. Chief among those, we've seen that Kieran Clark and Matty Longstaff, their time at the club will come to an end this summer. Clark will leave at the end of his contract. Longstaff will stay on to help rehabilitate an ACL injury, but he will leave as a free agent. Matt Ritchie, he's had a 1-year extension on his contract triggered, so he'll stay at the club for another 12 months. And the club have announced that they're in talks with Paul Dummett and Loris Karius over new deals. So, Miles, I haven't had time to digest all that. I think the main things to think about there are the Ritchie extension and the proposed extension to Dummett and Karius. We talked about it last week. We thought that might happen. What are your initial thoughts about the retain list from the club?
Well, we knew Eddie Howe's keenness to keep Dummett and Ritchie, certainly. Guess what we didn't know, that there was a clause in Ritchie's contract which could be activated. I don't think the club would have activated that if Ritchie didn't want to stay. Obviously, we've talked about his situation, his family being on the South Coast. That's not ideal for him, nor is the lack of football. But he's been at this club since 2016, and having been such a big part of this club's journey, the prospect of staying and being part of a Champions League campaign was obviously very, very persuasive on his part. Paul Dummett, would expect him to agree a new deal. As for Loris Karius, I guess it depends on what offers he gets elsewhere. Also, I guess a surprise was Mark Gillespie signing another contract. There was a question mark over his future. His contract had ended. Bear in mind, in 3 years, he's made 3 cup appearances. So he hasn't played much football at all. But they're going to need a big squad. And Eddie Howe clearly sees a role for him next season.
Absolutely. I think for me, that was the main thing, that they clearly value in the squad, not just the amount of people in it, but I think the dynamics as well. We all know Ritchie and Dummett are seen as good people behind the scenes. Now, Dom, ahead of the Champions League campaign, obviously there's homegrown rules with Dummett in particular fits in nicely, but how important is it to get for them names that maybe aren't getting the game time, but to keep the squad sort of familiarity and, to not have too many people coming in to break up that squad unity, because it has really helped them over the last season or so, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's important, and as you say, like Matt Ritchie, Paul Dummett have been really, really important players behind the scenes on the training ground for Newcastle this season. You see Paul Dummett, even when he's not in the squad, he's going to the away games, he's bringing his exercise bag, keeping fit. And Mark Gillespie as well is another one who falls into that bracket. He's just probably not like Dummett and Ritchie's never had that sort of regular first team football at Newcastle. But yeah, the homegrown aspect in terms of Dummett would be ideal to see him stay. And I think just the image of seeing Matt Ritchie coming on as a substitute at the Bernabeu or something like that would just be surreal, really, after the time he spent at the club and the dark days helping the club get promoted from the Championship. So yeah, it's good to see. And hopefully Newcastle can bolster this squad, because hopefully it's not a sort of warning sign, if you like, where they're padding out the squad with players who ultimately aren't going to get regular first team football. Hopefully it's a sign of things to come, where in the transfer window Newcastle can significantly improve on that squad.
Absolutely. I think we will touch on some of the names that have been linked with the move, but as I mentioned, Newcastle have already completed their first summer signing. Yankuba Minteh signed from Odense in Denmark for an undisclosed fee, believed to be around £7 million. Now, he won't join the club when in July, or when that deal made into a thing. He will go to Feyenoord on loan for the season. Feyenoord just won Eredivisie. They'll be playing Champions League football. Miles, what are the limited what we know about Minteh? Is Denmark. I don't keep up with the Denmark Super League. I'm not sure many people do. But what sort of do you know about that signing, and what sort of statement does that make about the future, that they're willing to spend £7 million on a player who's only played really one year of first team football?
Well, I think that fee tells us how highly they rate this player. I spoke to a journalist in Denmark. Got a few details. Can play on either side, very quick. And he scored minutes into his debut. Last season was his breakthrough season. So a lot of talent there, and it's. I think what's pleased me is that the early plan for him, that's going to help everyone. And he's going to a big club in Feyenoord next season. That looks to be a terrific loan move, one that will really kind of ready him potentially for first team football at Newcastle United. So that's certainly a positive. But sorry. So that's certainly a positive to have that big loan move there in place already, and a very quick player, as I say, either side, and certainly excited people in Odense, and they seem to be happy with having played a part, and they recognise that their own club as a stepping stone in this instance, and let's hope he progresses to the first team here.
And Dom, we've seen that they signed Garang Kual in January. Obviously, he moved on to Heart. It's good for the future that they're getting these deals in early and getting these really promising players on board, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, like Miles says, it's serious stuff. You go into Feyenoord, there no minnows. It's a step up from the likes of Garang Kual and going to Heart. Feyenoord, like you say, the Dutch champions. They'll be pot one in the Champions League next season. Could potentially face Newcastle in the Champions League. So going there, if he makes an impact, you'd argue if he could get a few goals and play regularly there next season, you're looking at could he be ready for the first team? Because if that's the calibre of loan he's got in Newcastle, we've spoke about the restrictions of financial fair play. They do have to look longer term, think outside the box slightly. And Eddie Howe's always stressed that if you can get a first team ready player, maybe in a few years' time, if you know what I mean, but so you can get a first team ready player now for say £50 million, or you can get a much younger player who for significantly less money, £7 million, who in a few years' time could be worth 50 million and could be ready for the first team. So it's just about finding that right balance. And Newcastle seems a smart piece of business, but like you say, we'll find out in the coming years whether it proves to be a sound investment.
Absolutely. I think that obviously we won't see as you mentioned, we won't see the impact of that sign until at least 12 months down the line. But one player that we hope, or we has been linked with Newcastle, and we hope that could make an immediate impact is James Maddison from Leicester. Reports this week that Newcastle lead the race for him. Tottenham are very hot on his signature. Is Maddison the sort of signing you'd be excited about, and someone that would be able to is a sort of statement signing Newcastle need heading into the Champions League and the Premier League next year?
Yeah, I would be excited about him. I mean, Newcastle played Leicester twice last season. I don't think we saw the best of James Maddison, but for a team that got relegated to put in 10 goals and 9 assists, those sort of figures, Newcastle finished fourth, and there wasn't really a player who could be compared to James Maddison in terms of the figures. I think Miguel Almiron, 11 goals, 4 assists, is probably as close as you're going to get, really. Callum Wilson also got a few assists as well. But the creative sort of output and the quality in and around the box that James Maddison would bring to a Newcastle side, who sometimes last season, certainly not towards the end, but at times, particularly after the World Cup, did lack that cutting edge. And James Maddison, from set pieces, from like I say, in and around the box, making those runs, his movement would be a step up from what Newcastle currently have. The one thing I would say is, if Leicester are wanting £60 million, he's got a year left on his contract. He's 26 years old. It's in football in terms not particularly young. That would potentially be a bit of a put off. But if they could get anything under 50 million, I'd say it would be a great piece of business for Newcastle.
And we could see a Maddison, Wilson, Trippier link up this week with England duty. We've seen a couple of teasers on social media of him and Maddison and Callum Wilson, especially playing a pool and things like that. But just, Miles, what are your thoughts on Maddison? And would that price, as Dom mentioned, 60 million, would that put you off if you were making the deal, considering all the financial fair play, considerations you've got to take into account?
Well, that's exactly as Dom said. It's going to come down at the price. The club was given some encouragement last summer that they could get Maddison, so they went in. They couldn't agree a price, and here we are 12 months later, and we're in the same position. So, talk of 60 million for players, Dom says, with the year left in his deal, whether he plays for England or not, it looks far too steep. Very early in the summer, early in the window, you would you would hope they can come to some agreement. Obviously, there's as you mentioned, there's Tottenham. There'll be other big clubs interested in him, but they won't be able to offer necessarily what Newcastle United can offer, which is Champions League football. And as you say, Wilson and the others in the England squad will be letting him know exactly what it's like playing for the club, playing at St James's Park. So I think Newcastle have got a lot, some strong cards in their hand. So let's see how this plays out.
Yeah, we've seen Maddison and numerous other, marquee elite signing sort of name, but there was one name that cropped up this week was Felix Nmecha from Wolfsburg. Now, he's a 22-year-old midfielder, sort of tall, very physical, sort of similar, in my head, similar to sort of Joe Willock, Joe Linton type playing style. Now, he's reportedly going to be available for about £15 million. Now, it's not the elite marquee name that we all expect no supporters might want to see, but deals like that are going to be really important to help, bolster the squad and help with them financial fair play constraints, aren't they, Dom?
Absolutely, and you have to remember Newcastle still haven't replaced John Joe Shelby. They need midfielders this summer. You'd argue they needed midfielders back in January. So I think a midfielder, James Maddison, and then if you can bolster that sort of midfield with maybe one or two, like you say, value for money, less marquee signings, if you like. And Felix Nmecha represents that in abundance. I think £15 million, 22 years old. He's a German international. He's played regularly at Wolfsburg. I think he ticks a large number of boxes, really, for what Newcastle will be after. And like you say, he is of a similar ilk to someone like Joe Willock, a similar age as well. And I think a big thing for me, I know he's technically a foreign import, if you like, if he were to come to Newcastle. In fact, he's brought up in England. He's played was at Man City for an extended period. That sort of homesickness aspect that you would get potentially with young players coming from abroad would be less of a factor, you'd like to think. So I think this one would be a one that would really excite me, even though in terms of, like you say, a marquee signing, it's not maybe the most glamorous, but it's something Newcastle will need for fighting on four fronts next season.
I think the marquee signings certainly will be left to Saudi Arabia this summer. We've seen PIF taking over four clubs there. They've signed Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante has moved over there. Miles, what's Saudi Arabia doing currently in the market? It's sort of a bit like China a few years ago. We saw that die off, but Saudi Arabia seem to have a renewed sort of vigor behind them. How do you see the big money deals they're making, impact world football and Newcastle really?
Well, I don't think really what we saw in China a few years ago was even anything approaching on this scale. It's extraordinary, really, and you can see Newcastle United just fitting into a bigger picture here in terms of their push to bring football to that top level football to that country. There's a lot of work to be done. Having been out there and seen the stadiums and the setup, but they've got money to burn, and we're seeing that right now. As I said, it's absolutely extraordinary, the kind of figures and the names that we're seeing going out there. They're talking to. Obviously, they missed out on Messi, but we're going to see a lot more big names go there this summer, and as I say, it's interesting to see where Newcastle United fits into this. Obviously, there'll be several strands to the Saudis and sport. You've got golf, and they've got a foothold in terms of the Premier League football. They're looking at the multi-club model elsewhere. So it's going to be a fascinating summer to see how this all plays out.
It really is. And Dom, we've seen, as journalists, the amount of interest that are in these Saudi deals. It's big interest in how it's going to sort of shape the world of football. As Miles said, Newcastle sort of fit in there somewhere. We're not sure where right now. But can you see any further, big money moves to Saudi? We've seen Neymar recently linked. Do you think that will become a trend over the next few windows, or even just this window where we see the biggest names in football linked with moves over there?
Absolutely. And I think Cristiano Ronaldo said it himself, whether you want to say it's arrogant or not, he did get the ball rolling back in January, probably one of the greatest players of all time, moving to the country, world record deal. They're not messing around, and we've seen that with the ownership of Newcastle United. Money's being spent, obviously restricted by financial fair play. PIF don't mess around, and the fact they've effectively acquired 75% share in 4 Saudi Pro League clubs, and since then like you say, the Benzema, the Kante deal's gone through. They've tried to get Messi as well, like you say, Neymar. Just some of the biggest players in world football are being linked in, and I don't think this will go away or be a flash in the pan anytime soon. So yeah, it's exciting. Like you both say, I'm not quite sure what it means for Newcastle United. Thinking cynically, is it a way to, could you circumvent financial fair play in some way and offer loan deals? It's a bit of a moral grey area personally, you'd think, but it's certainly interesting and it's certainly exciting because Newcastle last year they played two Saudi Pro League teams, Al Hilal and Al Ittihad. Benzema and Kante now play for Al Ittihad. Ronaldo plays for Al Nassr. So you'd think Newcastle would organise another friendly with a Saudi Pro League club potentially this summer, potentially as a winter friendly. So we could see some big names if there were at St James's Park, some big names coming to St James's Park to play against Newcastle.
It's certainly one to keep an eye on. I think just out the summer window, we're expecting a busy time in Newcastle and across the world really now, especially normally it's just Europe dominating, but as we've seen, Saudi Arabia will probably have their say in the transfer market. But as you mentioned, there's a potential for a friendly with the Saudi team, but ones that have been announced recently, we've seen Rangers, which is a testimonial for Alan McGregor. That's going to be at Ibrox, first time in just less than 10 years that Newcastle played there. Miles, Newcastle will be backed by 8,000 fans there. They've sold out their allocation, unsurprisingly. What are you expecting from that game, and just what an occasion that'll be in Glasgow?
Well, I was there for the last game, 10 odd years ago. But it won't be anything quite like what we're going to see this summer with 8,000 fans. It's trying to envisage that support again. That'll be extraordinary. I don't know if you've got your ticket, Joe. You going?
Yes, I'll be in amongst the 8,000 somewhere.
But yeah, I can only imagine what the atmosphere is going to be like. It's going to be extraordinary. As I say, that Ibrox is at the best of times is a noisy stadium. Add 8,000 Geordies to it, it's going to be quite something. Yeah, so I think we're all looking forward to that one.
Absolutely. We've seen that even though it's just a pre-season friendly with the testimonial there, Eddie Howe doesn't, and his team, they don't do friendly games to the Miles. They're going to be heading there to get the very best out of those 90 minutes.
Yeah, certainly, and they'll be good to go. You'd imagine from that very first game, the one they've just announced against Gateshead. So no, they're not. We didn't see them go through the motions at any point last pre-season. They were really. It's really going for it. So this would be. I think we're all looking forward to it.
Absolutely. As you say, the first game of pre-season will be against Gateshead at the Gateshead National Stadium. Now that game sold out within minutes, within hours of it being announced this morning. Newcastle have sold that allocation. Unsurprisingly, it's a little bit less of a trip than the Glasgow. But Dom, I know you've tracked Gateshead closely over the last few years, obviously under Mike Williamson. Just describe for the fans who maybe are going to that game or who don't know what Gateshead might offer that day, what style of football do they play and why that it's a big thing that Newcastle aren't just bringing an 11 to the team. They're not just bringing under 21s, that they're bringing their first team to the Gateshead International Stadium that day.
Yeah, we've seen in the past Newcastle have like last season they played Gateshead behind closed doors. Seasons prior to that, they've sent a Newcastle 11 made up of basically under 21s players. It's since Steve McClaven's first game in 2015. The last time that Newcastle sent a first team, and I think it was 5,500 in the National Stadium that day. So that's going to be great for Gateshead. Obviously, the issues getting tickets, the demand for Newcastle tickets at the moment is so big, and Gateshead having to sell the tickets on their own website. Just the traffic for that, it's obviously going to be insane. So, unfortunately, some people will miss out, even though the Gateshead International Stadium's a big stadium. But just on Gateshead, Mike Williamson. Like you say, I've followed Gateshead for a while, and Mike Williamson has got a really, really good young team with a lot of Newcastle connections there. A lot of players come through the academy. A couple have recently moved on, but he's got them playing some really good football. They like to play it out from the back, attack. Not too dissimilar from Newcastle, obviously. Not quite as intense, but they do like to play a good passing game and Mike Williamson, player manager, still technically there. I'd expect him. He'd probably be on the sidelines for this game. But it'll be an interesting one. In Gateshead, season before last promoted, and this season got to the FA Trophy final. So, I mean, as far as the fifth tier competition is concerned, I'd expect them to put up a decent fight as well.
Absolutely, I think it'll be great. And as you say, they do play really good football. I know that Eddie Howe and his staff were very impressed by that behind closed doors game. And I think that if there is a future for potential, loan players to go out there, I think it's a really good place to help develop these players, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Eddie Howe's spoken previously, loaning players out. It's been a sticking point for a while, to be honest. Obviously, been involved at Gateshead previously. Why don't Newcastle send us more players? Why can't we get a relationship going there? Because you look at players like Paul Dummett, he got his start at Gateshead. James Tavernier as well previously was there, had a great loan spell there, and then although he moved on from Newcastle, has forged a great career at at Rangers. Sorry, so. Yeah, there's certainly value, I think, for sending players there. It's just about sending the right players there. We saw this season Dan Langley going there on loan, a goalkeeper. It's difficult if it's your first spell in senior football and you're a goalkeeper, and the National League, such a physical league where they just pile players on top of you from every set piece, basically. That's going to be tough, and that didn't quite work out. But if you can send the right players along, then that would be a great partnership to have, because like you say, it's just across the river. It's easy work. Not a lot of travelling for Shola Amiobi as a loan manager to go and watch the players and see how they're doing as well. Can keep a close eye on them. So I'd like to see it personally, and I think both clubs could benefit from it.
Perfect. Dom, Miles, thank you for joining me today on there. And everyone, thanks for listening. Please remember that you can sign up for our latest Newcastle United newsletter that will deliver the very latest news from St. James Park straight to your inbox by visiting www.shieldsgazette.com/newsletter. Once again, thank you for listening for another episode of the Mouth of Time podcast, and we hope you join us again very soon.